friends, it's Shari. Today I have a fun monogram felt stitching project to share with you. I thought I would start out this video by showing you my storage method for my felt stitching dies. I use these big job ticket holders and these 8.5 by 11 magnet sheets from Lawn Fawn. These fit into those job ticket holders perfectly and they hold a whole bunch of dies. As you can see, I have a bunch of different sets here. I just clipped mine apart with my wire snips, and we're starting with the large basic heart today for my projects. I also like to put the instruction sheets that come with my dies into some page protectors and slide those into the job ticket holder as well, so all my instructions stay with the dies that they go with. So as you can see here, I have my inspiration guide for my heart. I'm using the scalloped heart as well. These two will layer together. And I'll also be using the embroidered heart vine details die. This just cuts out the holes for the vine detail embroidery, which you can see here. These have instructions on that, and they'll also have instructions on the back, which I'll show you a little bit later, showing you how to do the vine embroidery. I'm also using the monogram alphabet. I have all my alphabets together. I have the little one on a little card, and then I have the large ones on this big magnetic card, but I'm only using the monogram alphabet today rather than the ones that cut just the holes. I'll be using the Love Bug color story from Poshta Design. This color story comes with matching floss and matching sequins and beads, and I haven't labeled these yet, so I thought I would show you how I label them. I just use my label maker and make a little label with the collection name on it and put those onto my little embellishments. I put it onto my matching floss, and then I also put it on the bag of the felt. And I like to keep my color stories together in my storage because the work's already been done for me. I already have a nice little, I just line them up in my box like this, and I can see the label on the side, and then I know that all these colors are going to look great together. I do sometimes mix and match, but for the most part, I like to grab a color story and go from there. So I'm pulling out the colors that I want to use for my project today. I decided to stick with the 2 shades of pink, and then I will be using the gray for the S. And to pull in the other colors, I decided to use that dark teal for my thread for my embroidery detail. So to start out, I need to cut my pieces. I'm cutting 2 of the large basic heart from the dark pink, and I thought I would show you how I go about doing this. Sometimes I don't cut my felt if I'm not sure the best way to get the most out of my felt, and for this one, I left it on the roll, and I'm going to roll it through my die cut machine. Now, I like to roll it through twice. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of all in the way of my camera here. I don't usually die cut on screen. I usually have this sitting to the side, so this is a little bit different for me. And the reason why I did not cut my felt is because I can put this one beside it and make the most out of my felt. Now, I do like to clear out all the holes before I cut again. I think that that just cuts the holes better if you clear out those little pieces of felt. So I was using my Spellbinders tool to clear out those little pieces of felt in the holes. And like I said, I try to run it through twice. I don't go all the way so that my die doesn't shift. And I cut 2 of those. I only cut 1 of the scallop circle using the same method, and I will layer that in between. But I do need to cut out those embroidery vine details. So this die only cuts these holes. It does not have a cutting line on the outside. The reason why this die is shaped like this is so you can easily lay this whole piece over the one you've already cut, and it will cut the little holes for the embroidery vine detail. Now, usually when I cut a letter, I can cut the inline letters and I have the holes to line up, but the suggestion on the directions for this one said not to do that because there were so many holes in the embroidery vine details. So I'll just cut my little S out of the gray, and I also thought I would leave in here how I poke out the holes. I guess you don't have to poke out all the holes, but I like to because it helps with lining things up. And I just use a straightened paper clip to do this. Now you can use a lint roller as I have here. I have a little one I keep on my desk, but it didn't pull out all the holes, and I make sure when I do this, I always do it on the back because I don't want to make my felt fuzzy from that lint roller, and I'm doing it very gently. But another little trick, as you can see, is to poke those holes out directly onto that tape, and it kind of catches everything, which is kind of nice. Also, this lint roller is great for cleaning up these pieces off my desk. So once I have all of the holes poked out, I can start to assemble things and do some stitching. Now, when you have a piece like this that has some embroidery detail and the S embellishment, you want to do all of that stitching first before you stitch this part to that scalloped heart behind it. Now for my vine detail, I decided to pull out a floss from my stash. I did not use that same teal that came in the color story. I picked one that was a little bit greener, and that's what I'll be using for my embroidery detail. I am going to stitch with 3 strands, so I'm taking my floss and I'm splitting it down the middle, so I have 2 strands of 3 floss pieces. So I'm going to take these 3 strands and thread these into my needle. But before I start stitching, I'm going to pull out my inspiration guide and my directions, because this particular one tells me here that I did not need to cut the S. I'm just going to stitch that directly on after I do my vine details. And I'm going to flip it over. There is a second page to this one with a much more enlarged picture that shows you exactly how to stitch those lazy daisies and get that vine detail that is intended. So I will just have this sitting here as I do my stitching as a guide, because I did get to the corner where it kind of turns up there in the top of the heart, and the pattern that I was going by, going around, going every other side, it changes a little bit in that corner because we have a tight turn up there. So I'm going to talk about that when I get to that part. So I'm starting in the bottom corner down here, and I'm coming up through the back. I'm just going to hold this with my finger, and I'm starting out by stitching the 2 lazy daisies at the bottom. There's one going out the top of this little point and out the bottom of this little point. And to do a lazy daisy stitch, you come up through one hole, you're going to go back through that same hole, but not pull it all the way, and leave a loop just like this. And then you're going to come up through the other hole through the middle of your loop. This makes that little petal shape. And once you've done that, you're going to go back in through this hole, but you want to do this on the other side of your floss so that this stitch holds the top of that loop in place. And I need to fix mine a little bit. I had a little bit of a knot there. You do want to make sure that you don't pull it too tight, because you want this piece of floss that's holding the top of the loop to stay on the front of the fabric if possible. And I actually pulled mine a little bit too taut, and that's what I was fixing there. So you're going to see me do this again for this lazy daisy stitch that's at the bottom of the point. So again, I'm coming up in the center, in that same point that I did the other one. I'm going to loop my floss around. I like to hold it with my thumb so I don't pull it through. Create a little loop, and then I'm going back through the other hole that's at the top of that little petal stitch. I'm going to flip it around here so it's easy to see. Then I'll go back through that hole, going on the other side of my floss so it holds it in place. Hopefully you can see those 2 little stitches. Then I started working on the straight line that makes that heart shape. And what I decided to do to kind of make my life a little easier is to go ahead and stitch this whole straight line. So I'm going to do my running stitch all the way around to the little divot point at the top. So again, this is going in and out every other hole, so you kind of get a dashed stitch. And then once I get to the end, I am going to do the lazy daisies at the end of this. So I did my lazy daisy at the beginning in that top corner, and then there's one at the end. Hopefully you can see that there. So again, out, back in the same hole, keep a loop, then come up through the other hole that's at the top of that stitch and catch that loop, then go back in on the other side. And now I can work my way back with that running stitch and complete the straight line that this stitching creates all the way back down to that bottom point. And this actually really helped me kind of keep track a little better when I started doing the lazy daisy stitches that go all the way up the side. I liked that this was already done. I think that doing this method kept this particular stitch a little bit straighter because the lazy daisies alternate from side to side, and I think that it would have been not quite as straight if I had stitched this straight piece as I did my little lazy daisy stitches. I did decide to go ahead and stitch the other side. I am going to tie it off here. And I'm just doing this running stitch up the other side, and when I get to the point at the top, I will do that lazy daisy stitch that's at the end, just like I did on the other side. And this will kind of end that one. They kind of end up almost in the same spot because they're in the same hole right there in the center. Then I'm going back in the other direction with that running stitch to finish off this center vine detail. And again, I think that this really helped this particular stitch stay nice and straight. It also gave me a guide to kind of not have so many holes that are just kind of confusing. I knew that this was the center of my vine, and I think that that really helped when it got to this point where I'm going to do all these little lazy daisy stitches. So the first one starts on the outside, and we're going to skip each hole on the vine part that I've already stitched. So we're going to come up, go back in the same hole, and then leave that loop, and then we're going to come up in that outside hole and tack down the outside of the loop. Then we're going to go up to the next stitch and do the same thing on the other side. So having this vine in the center already stitched was very helpful. I could see where my next hole was that I needed to come up in to start the next little petal. So I'm just working my way up, switching from outside, then the next little loop will be on the inside. And it works left to right or outside to inside all the way till we get up to that top part where we're going to kind of make the turn up there. So I am leaving this in kind of in fast time just so you can see the process. Hopefully this is helpful if you have this die at home. Now I did get to the point where I needed to tie off my string, so it's a little too short to do anything else. I'm going to tie it off here, and then I'll get me another piece of floss. But you can see how that's starting to take shape. And this does take a little extra time because, you know, there are more embroidery stitches, but the end result was really nice once I was done. So back to the every other side. This one was on the inside, then I'm going to go on the outside. And the reason why I really love that Poshta Design includes this guide to look at is because I don't know that I would have figured out that when I get up to this turn at the top, I'm going to need to do 2 on the outside to make it work. I'm not quite there yet. But I could tell when I got to this point that things were starting to get really tight on this inside turn. So this is when I sort of stopped and looked at my directions or my little guide over here to see. So here is where we're going to do 2 on the outside. So instead of skipping to the inside right here, I'm going to do another one on the outside of the heart. Which, let me turn this here so there's not a glare. This is where I'm at right here. So I had an inside, and that's a big jump from that outside loop to another inside loop. So I can see that I need to do 2 outside lazy daisy petals. So I'll pick this up so you can see it a little better. I am right here at this one, and you can see the next one is also on the outside. So we're still skipping a stitch on that vine, that center area, but instead of flip-flopping from the outside to in, we're going to do 2 outside lazy daisy stitches, and now we can switch back over to the inside. So there's only 2 like this to help you turn that corner. Then we're back to our same rhythm of going from the outside to the inside all the way until we get to that center point. And I'm just kind of checking as I'm getting to the end, making sure that I'm on the right track. You don't want to get off track too far down the road and have to take a whole bunch out. I did pull mine a little too tight there, and that's what I was doing, was kind of fixing that, pulling it out with my needle a little bit. Like I said, you want kind of a soft hand with this. You don't want to pull these very tight. You just want that floss to lay loosely on the outside and create that little petal shape. And then now I'm getting to this last one here. There's 2 right at the end. So this last one is on the inside, and you can see how I've created that whole vine. Now I need to do the same thing on the other side. But I was doing pretty well. I did have a nice knot here. I was trying to figure out what I did, and I just decided to leave that. I am going to tie this off though here. Instead of flipping over to the other side, I liked going from the bottom to the top. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side versus continuing on and going from the top to the bottom. I think my rhythm from the bottom to the top worked well for me. So I skipped over that part so that we're not seeing all that stitching, but I just tied it off. It started again at the bottom point and then did the left side of the heart the same way that I did the right side. And then once I get back to the middle, I can tie that off, and all of that embroidery of the vine is done, and it is so pretty. I love how it turned out. So now for the monogram part of this project, I did pull out the matching gray thread from the color story. I didn't get too long of a piece because this S isn't too big. And then I'll just line up my S in the center. Normally I use the inline alphabet and cut the holes and line that up, but for this particular one, the directions suggested not doing that because that would just create more holes and a little bit of confusion. So what I did to hold it in place is I just added some tiny, teeny tiny dots of some tacky glue from this tacky glue pen. Then I'm going to pick this up with my tweezers so that I don't get glue on my fingers, so I don't get glue on my project. And this will just hold it in place because I'm not lining up holes, I'm stitching through the fabric versus a hole. Now you could do a running stitch on this where you go down to the bottom of the S and then work your way back up to fill in all those spaces between the holes. But since the stitching on the back of this heart is hidden, and it will be sandwiched in between 2 pieces of felt, I just decided to go ahead and do a traditional back stitch where I do every space and every opening between the holes. So that's what I'm doing on my S. And once I get all the way to the bottom and everything's stitched in, which I was almost out of thread, so I'm being very careful. I'm having to thread my needle. I just didn't want to have to get another piece of floss just for one stitch. So I'm trying to play chicken here with my floss, but I got it to the end of my S, and then I will tie it off. So all those messy stitches on the back will get hidden between my 2 layers of felt. I did decide that I wanted to add some bead embellishments to this before I put these together. And I've switched to a different needle that has a much smaller eye. So you need to use a beading needle or a needle with a very small eye. I am only using 1 strand of floss for my beads, and I'm just using the clear ones for this. So I'll pick up the bead and then go back in about the same place, just on the other side of the bead, and that will hold it in place. And I think that this turned out really cute. It looks kind of like little clear berries on this vine, and there's really no rhyme or reason to where I'm putting them. I'm just kind of trying to space them pretty evenly on each side. So I'll tie this off on this side here, and then I will repeat the same process on the other side of the heart, and I actually added one below the S as well. Now to stuff my hearts, this is my little trick that I like to do, which is to add batting so that I'm not trying to add polyfill. This stays nice and flat, it makes it puffy, but it's a lot easier to deal with. And the way I like to do this, especially if I have a nice open die like the heart here, I like to trace on the inside of the die, because then I know that my batting is going to miss the holes, because I don't want to stitch through my batting. And I'm just drawing it on there with a pen and then cutting it out. This obviously doesn't have to be perfect, but this is a really easy way to get the shape that you need to put on the inside. For this particular project, I'm cutting 2 layers. I have 2 of the dark pink hearts, and I'll be layering one on each side of the scalloped heart. And I'll be putting batting between the scalloped heart and the dark pink heart. Now I do like to kind of hold it in place so things don't shift while I'm stitching, and this is how I do that. Just some tiny dots of glue, and it will hold that and it will not shift around. So let me flip it over and do the same on this side, some little dots of glue. This is going to hold the other piece of batting. And then I can also add a few little dots of glue to hold my felt in place as well. This one, I'm picking out a couple more of those little holes that weren't quite all poked out. Now to line up my holes, I like to kind of hold it up so I can see the light through the 2 layers and then make sure my holes are lined up. I'm just going to pat that in place, and I know my little dots of glue will hold it so things don't shift around, because I've got 5 layers of stuff here. I have 3 layers of felt and 2 layers of batting, and I just want that sandwich of everything to stay in place. So I'm pulling out this pale pink floss. This is again from my Love Bug color story. I'm dividing this, so I have 3 strands of floss, and this is the color I'm going to use to stitch around that dark pink heart onto the scalloped heart. Now I do want to add a little hanger before I stitch all the way around so that my hanger is inside of my heart, and I'm just cutting a piece of some pink gross grain ribbon, and I'll just make my little hanger. So I'm trimming it off. I always cut things longer than I need them. It's a lot easier to trim things down versus try to make things longer. That doesn't ever work. Now here is the other thing that I made to hang on Scout's tent. This is a big S. So I just pulled this out so that I could get my hanger the right length without having to go look at her little tent and check. And I like to use the little glue trick to hold my hanger in place too. This also makes it kind of stay better in the end once the glue is dry. So just a few dots of glue, and that will hold that in place. So now to start my stitching, I of course want to start between layers. So as you can see, I did not go through that pink layer on the back, or the dark pink layer on the back. I started between the dark pink and the light pink, but I went all the way through to the front, and then with my second stitch, I will go through all the layers of felt and pull it out. And this is because I want the tails to be between the layers so I can hide them once I'm done stitching. So you can see this one goes all the way through all the layers. Then I will move on to the next one, and I'm just going to do a running stitch around this. So it will look like every other stitch. You can see how this is going to start to take shape. So let's speed things up a little bit so you can see me stitch around this heart. And for this one, I did use a clothespin to kind of hold it so things didn't shift around, because it is a bigger piece with a lot of layers. Oh, my hanger came out. I'll just put that back in there, and then I moved my clothespin to hold my hanger in place. And then you can see I am working my way around with that running stitch. So you kind of get that every other ticking around the heart. And I actually ended up liking the way this looked. Sometimes I leave it as every other stitch. Sometimes I go back in the other direction. So I've gotten around to where my hanger is now, and I'm making sure that my stitches kind of pierce through that ribbon, and that's going to help hold it in place as well. So it takes a little bit more effort to pierce through that ribbon because that ribbon obviously doesn't have a pre-cut hole for you. I've worked my way around to where I got back to the beginning, and then I need to do this last stitch that's just through the dark pink. And then I'm going to tie it off. I like the look of every other stitch on this one, so I'm not going to go back the other direction. So I'm tying off my knot, which will end up being between the dark pink and the light pink layers. I'm going to trim off the tail of my floss, and then to hide the ends, I'm going to thread my needle with the tail, go back in between the two layers, and then come out somewhere here in the back. And let me do the other tail as well. It's hard to do both tails at once sometimes because that's a lot of floss to get in your needle. And they're not usually the same length. So let me do the same thing with this one, between the two pieces, out the back, and then just trim it off. And then here is my finished cute little heart that hangs on Scout's little dog tent. I just think it turned out so cute. So here's another look at that, and I really hope you've enjoyed today's video showing you how to do some embroidery and make a fun monogram heart. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.